So now that we have some images into the catalog, I'm going to show you the basics of editing. So one, if you double click on an image, it will make it larger. And you can use the right and left arrow keys to go through your pictures in this film roll at the bottom. One of the things that I like to do is to go through and find images that are, let's say, have more potential. And I'll click on 3 stars. You can also flag them or use a color rating. Flagging will make a little flag appear in the corner here, but I like stars because they're more visible at the bottom. Or you could do a color label like green, and that'll make the box green. But as I said, I prefer to work with stars. And one of the reasons I prefer to do that is when I go over here to organize them, I can go to rated, and it will grab any images that have a star in them. And what I can do is I can hit, say, 3 stars. But if I go back to all my photographs, and I do that typically by clicking on it here, or you can do it here to previous import versus all photographs, which in this case, they're exactly the same. But I'll say maybe make this one a 4 star. And I can do that by just hitting 4, and it'll show up as 4 stars. And maybe I pick another image, I don't know, this one will make it 5 stars. So now if I go to my filtering to 3 stars, it'll show me anything with 3 stars or higher. If I hit on 4, it'll show me 4 stars or higher, or 5 stars will show me only the very best. So I can go through this and kind of do multiple passes going through, rating things at 1, 2, or 3 stars, then going through again and rating them even higher for the ones I really like, and narrowing it down to my best 5, maybe even best 1 image in a folder. Now, let me go back. If I turn these stars all the way off, it'll give me all my images again. And I can go through and I'll select one, maybe this one, for example. Actually, while I'm thinking of it, I should show you how to rotate. So if I have one that is not oriented the right way, under this downward pointing arrow, there's going to be a rotate option that will let me, I'm going to double click into it, rotate right or left. Okay, now I'm going to pick an image to edit, and I think I'll do, maybe that one's harder to understand what it is. I'll go to this one, which is a model. And I'll go into develop, and we'll start at the top here on the right. On the left-hand side, we have on our histogram our black values, and we have a lot of them. And because they're spiking up this wall, basically, that means there's a lot of area that doesn't have detail in the blacks. It would be the same thing on the far right if we were climbing the wall. But what we can do is we can click on this little square, and it's going to bring up, and I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little blue kind of static that shows up here. I'm going to darken my image so it becomes more obvious. There we go. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell me where there's no detail in the black. Similarly, if my image was overexposed, by clicking on this square here, or the triangle inside the square, it's going to show me in red where there's no detail in the whites. So with a well-exposed image, we won't have much of either of that, but we're going to go through and we're going to edit in order to make sure that we have detail in our whites and our blacks as much as possible, and make sure that we have the right contrast and the right kind of brightness in every value. What I would start off by doing, and this is kind of counterintuitive because I want you to learn to use the program to the best of its ability, but sometimes we learn by doing the easiest way. And the easiest way is to hit auto here in the basics. And that's going to kind of pull out detail in a lot of areas. Usually there's going to be a little bit of subtle editing to go on, but I'm going to just hit Command Z and go back, and you'll see there's a lot more detail in the shadows than there was before. Now, looking at our histogram, I know that we still have a lot of shadows that are blocked up, and seeing the kind of blue spots, that tells me that there's still some areas that maybe could be brighter. Now, rather than brightening the whole thing by using exposure, which I could do, but now it's making a lot of the image kind of really white. I'll go back to auto. And if I want to adjust only the blacks or the shadows, I can grab just these sliders for them. So I'm going to take the blacks and I'm going to move them to the right to make them less black. And that's going to pull out a lot more detail. And I can see a bit more in the brick here particularly. And I can see based on the histogram that nothing's hitting and climbing way up the wall. Yes, there's a spike here in the shadow area, but it's not a pool of an area that is pure black. So I like that. And I can go through and I can play with each of these. I should start off by saying I talked about exposure being really your main control for brightness, but I skipped over your color balance. So your color balance is going to be your blue, yellow, and magenta versus green. And usually hitting auto does a pretty good job. And I kind of like what it did, but maybe if you don't, maybe you liked it warmer, or if you know that there's an area in the image that is a neutral gray, you could take this gray eyedropper and click on an area. And it gives you a little preview in the top left navigator here of what it would look like if you clicked on that area. But you could also just start clicking and see what it does. And I'm going to say this clothing here is probably what I think is going to be the most neutral gray, and I'll click on that. And the difference between that and auto is, yeah, not a huge difference. So I could do that custom with the eyedropper, or just try auto here, and it usually does a good job. I wouldn't play with the sliders here because a little goes a long way, and it can kind of get messed up quick. So either use the gray eyedropper or use auto, and you're probably going to be in good shape. Now, I talked about exposure. Underneath exposure is contrast. So a lot of students like a lot of contrast, but I would say a photo one student's instinct is lots of contrast is good. And I'm going to say no. Keep it between 0 and 20. So if you really want contrast, put in manually 20 there, but don't go pulling it really far out of whack. Now for highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, you can see that it's highlighting different areas on the histogram at the top here when I go over each of those. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they're going to affect. But basically, if you have really, really bright white tones that you want to bring in, take the whites and pull them to the left. And I can go a little bit with this, and I think it's not going to lose contrast, and it's going to actually pull in a little bit more detail in this area. Shadows, well, shadows will give us a little bit more detail in here, but it's going to reduce contrast. So let me pull that up and see if we still like that. And at some point when you go really far, like to 100, you start seeing a lot of noise in here. So I'm not going to go all the way to 100. I'm going to probably leave it back at about 80. Whites is really for that far end. I didn't adjust highlights, I adjusted whites, so that's what I did before. But if I do highlights, that might pull in some more detail here, but it might also flatten it. So yeah, I don't really like it all the way to the left, so I'm going to leave it about where it was. And then blacks, we pulled up some, but if I go more, you're going to see that noise in here a lot. So I'm going to hit Command Z and go back to what it was. I think overall this works pretty well. So I would say go with auto, and then just do some fine tuning after that if you think there's areas that are too light or too dark. For screen editing, I'm not going to mess with texture clarity or dehaze. Those are changing contrast at such a small level that we're really not going to notice it at the resolution we're exporting. And then I'll just briefly explain the difference between vibrance and saturation. So I think we all know what saturation is. It's going to make the color of whatever color it is more intense, right? And that's, small amount is okay with that. Again, I wouldn't go more than 20 points. But by default, it's usually changing the vibrance. And I'll just set this to 0 so you can hopefully see a little bit of a difference. It's minor. What vibrance does is it increases the colors of anything that isn't really skin tone. So that way you can be editing a portrait and you can increase the saturation without making the skin tones look too red or yellow or something of that sort. So I would probably not mess with saturation at all and play with vibrance, and at most, again, 20 points. And it's subtle, but don't go crazy with it. All right, so that is our basic editing, and I'll go into deeper things in another video.